They laughed at the Royal Guard scars, until a veteran recognized the unit tattoo on his wrist. I heard the laughing before I saw who was doing it. That is the thing about a laugh in a stone forecourt. It comes off the walls at you sideways, so you turn the wrong way first, and by the time you have found it, the shape of it has already told you what kind of laugh it is. There is a laugh that has joy in it. There is a laugh that has surprise in it. And then there is the third kind, the one with a hook on the end. And I have heard that one in barracks and in bar rooms and in the long gray wards where they put men who came home wrong. And I knew it at 72 the same as I knew it at 19. I was on the Corvin forecourt because it was a Tuesday, and on Tuesdays I walk. My knee prefers Tuesdays. The physician at the Veterans Clinic on Merrill Lane says the knee has no opinions, that it is bone and gristle and a bad repair job from a bad year, but I have lived inside it 4 decades longer than he has looked at it. 9:30 in the morning, the last week of a wet autumn, and the crowd at the palace's outer gate thin and cold. I come to look at the guardsmen. I am not sentimental about it. I come because when I was a young man I stood in a line like that in a different country, in weather that did not care about anybody's knee, and an old soldier likes to see a thing done properly. The laughing was coming from a knot of people at the near sentry box, 5 or 6 of them, backs to me, phones up. I did not hurry. I have not hurried in 11 years. I came along the railings with my stick tapping the cobbles, and I let the crowd part around me the way crowds part around old men, absently, without looking, as if I were a bollard that had learned to move. Then I saw him. He was on the left-hand post, the one that stands closest to the little pedestrian arch, where the public can get near enough to breathe on you. Red tunic, brass, black bearskin, white gloves, rifle at his side, boots that would have shamed my old company sergeant into an early grave. Perfect. Immaculate. Standing the way they are taught to stand, which is not standing at all but something more like being built. And the left side of his face was not the same as the right side. I will describe it once and then I will not keep going back to it, because I have been on the other end of that particular kind of staring, and I know what it costs. The left side of his jaw and his cheek and the run of skin up towards his ear had been remade. It was smooth where a face is not usually smooth and tight where a face is usually loose, and it caught the gray morning light differently, so that half of him looked like a man and half of him looked like something poured. There was a seam under his ear. The edge of it went down into his collar. His left hand in its white glove was a little wrong in the shape. You could see it in the way the glove sat, the knuckles not where knuckles ought to be. He was perhaps 50, maybe 52. He had the eyes of a man who has decided, permanently, to look at the middle distance and to make the middle distance come to him. Fire, anybody who has been near it knows fire. You do not mistake it for anything else. And there were 3 young men and 2 young women standing a hand's breadth from him with their telephones held up, and the tall one at the front was saying, in that carrying voice that expensive schools give away free with the uniform, "No, but look at it, look, mate, did you fall asleep on the toaster?" They howled. That was the laugh, the hooked one. I stopped where I was, about 10 feet back, and I put both hands on my stick, and I felt something old and unhelpful come up through me from the soles of my boots. The tall one was, I learned his name later. Everybody learned his name later, Julian Prue, 26. His grandfather had put a shipping line together out of nothing and his father had turned it into money, and Julian had inherited the money and none of the nothing, which is a bad way round to inherit things. He wore a coat that cost more than my pension pays in 3 months, and he was the sort of handsome that is really just symmetry and good dentistry standing very close together. Behind him, a shorter one, casped in, laughing a half-second after Julian laughed, always a half-second, the way a dog barks after the other dog. And a young woman filming, phone held level and steady, not laughing at all, which I noticed and did not understand until much later. Neve Lorimer. Seriously though, Julian leaned in. He leaned in the way you would lean over a fence to look at a pig. Seriously, do they let you do the front gate with that? Isn't that like bad for tourism? The guardsman did not move. I want you to understand what that means, because I do not think Julian Prue understood it, and I do not think the 2 million people who watched it that night understood it either. It does not mean the man was empty. It does not mean he was a statue, and statues do not care. It means that somewhere behind that unmoving face a decision was being made and remade again, once a second, for as long as it took, and every single one of those decisions cost him something, and he paid and paid and paid, and did not stop paying. I know what that costs because I could not have done it. I was standing 10 feet away with a bad knee and a walking stick and no rifle and no oath, and I was already shaking. "Come on," Julian said. He was warming up. The phones were on him and he could feel it. "Come on, give us something. Blink. Blink if you're in there." "Julian," said Casper, delighted. "Julian, do the thing." Julian did the thing. He put his own face 6 inches from the guardsman's scarred cheek, and he pulled a face, puffed his cheeks, screwed one eye up, twisted his mouth, a cruel, easy, ugly little imitation. And he held it there. And Casper made a noise like a kettle, and 2 of the tourists at the railing laughed too, because laughter is contagious in the way that the flu is contagious, without asking permission and without any particular malice, and that is what makes it dangerous. The guardsman looked at the middle distance. Somebody at the back of the crowd said, "Leave him alone, he's not allowed to say anything." And somebody else said, "That's the point, isn't it?" And there was more laughing, and I had gone very still, the way you go still when you realize the thing in front of you is not going to stop on its own. Now, I am going to be honest with you, because I have got to the age where lying is more effort than it is worth. I did not step in, not then. I have thought about that at 3 in the morning more times than I would like to write down. I was 72. I had a stick and a knee and a heart that the clinic on Merrow Lane describes as adequate, which is the sort of word you use about a hotel. There were 5 of them, and they were the kind of young that finds an old man an amusing obstacle rather than a reason to stop. And underneath, the arithmetic there was the plain fact that I had spent 41 years being told, in 100 quiet official ways, that my opinion of what happened to men's faces was not required. So I stood there with my hands on my stick, and I did nothing, and the shame of that is mine, and I have kept it. But I watched. I have always been good at watching. It is nearly a trade. And so I saw what happened next, and I saw it from 10 feet, and I am the only person on that forecourt who understood a single thing about it. Julian got bored of the face. That is the trouble with cruelty. It needs feeding. He straightened up and stepped back and looked the guardsman over the way a man looks over a horse he is not going to buy, and his eye went down from the ruined cheek to the collar, and from the collar to the tunic, and from the tunic to the white glove, and to the wrist above it, where the red cuff of the sleeve met the glove and left, in the way of all uniforms in all countries in all the years there have been uniforms, about an inch of a man. And that inch was scarred too. "Oh," Julian said quietly with real pleasure, "oh, it goes all the way down." "Julian," said Neve Lorimer behind the phone, first time she spoke, "I remember it because of what it cost her later." "How far does it go?" Julian said. He was speaking to the guardsman now, close, conversational, delighted. "How far? Come on, show us. It's for the internet, show us the arm." And he reached out, and he took hold of the guardsman's left wrist, took hold of it, closed his manicured hand around the cuff of a serving soldier of the household guard on his post, in front of the palace of a kingdom, with 5 telephones running, and he pulled the sleeve back. 3 things happened in about a second and a half, and I have had 4 decades of practice at unpacking a second and a half. The first, the crowd made a sound, not a laugh, the sound a crowd makes when it realizes it has been laughing at something that has just become serious, a sort of gasp with a hinge in it. The second, the guardsman did not move. He did not pull his arm back. He did not turn his head. He did not so much as change the rhythm of his breathing, and I was watching his chest, and I would have seen it. He allowed his own arm to be handled like a piece of meat on a hook by a boy less than half his age, because his orders said he stood his post, and his post said he did not react to the public. And there was not, in the whole architecture of that man, a single crack for the anger to get out of. And the third, the cuff came back and the glove came down, and for perhaps 2 seconds too, I have counted them 10,000 times. The inside of his left wrist was bare to the morning. The skin there was scarred, yes, ridged and shining, the way I had known it would be. But the scarring had gone round it. That is the strange mercy of fire. It takes what it takes and it leaves what it leaves, and there is no reasoning with the shape of it. There was a band of that wrist, no wider than my thumb, that had come through. Old skin, ordinary skin. And on that band of old skin there was a mark, faded to the color of a rain cloud, no bigger than a coin. A lantern. A small square lantern, drawn in 6 or 7 lines. The way a man draws a thing when he has to draw it 100 times in one night on 100 arms, with a needle and a pot of ash and a lamp burning down. And around the lantern, not quite closing, a ring with a gap in it. The world went out from under me. I do not mean that as a figure of speech. I mean the forecourt tilted and the railing swam, and I put my weight on the stick, and the stick slid an inch on the wet cobble, and my knee took what was left and screamed about it. And I heard, very far off, Julian Prue saying something about how it looked like a little box, and Caspar Din saying it looked like a lunchbox, and the laughter starting again, out there somewhere, in a world I was no longer standing in. Because I had seen that mark before. I had seen it in a photograph that sits in a tin on the 3rd shelf of my kitchen dresser, under a folded card, and a ribbon I have never once worn. I had seen it on my brother's arm. The cuff fell. The glove went back where it belonged. The whole thing had lasted less than the time it takes to say so. Julian Prue was already turning away, already grinning at the camera, already saying the words that 4 million people would hear by Thursday. There you go. That's the tour. That's your household guard, folks. And he clapped the guardsman on the shoulder as he went, the way you would pat a wall. And the guardsman stood on his post and looked at the middle distance and did not move. I stood there until they had gone. It took a long time, or it took no time. My sense of it is not reliable. When I could see properly again, the little crowd had dissolved back into the general business of a Tuesday, and the guardsman was still there, exactly as he had been, and the light had not changed, and nothing had changed, and the whole world had gone on being a place where nothing had happened. I got myself to the railing. I got both hands on it. I looked at him. 41 years. 41 years of letters. 41 years of being answered by clerks when I was answered at all, in that particular language they keep in a drawer for men like me. We can find no record asterisk, the matter you refer to asterisk. There is no unit of that designation asterisk. 41 years of my mother dying without a stone to put a name on, because they would not give us the name to put. And here it was, on a Tuesday in the rain, on the wrist of a man that 5 children in expensive coats had been laughing at. I opened my mouth. I am not proud of what came out of it, which was nothing at all. My throat had closed like a fist. I stood at that railing with my hands shaking on the wet iron, and I looked at a serving guardsman of the household who could not look back at me, and I could not make a single sound. And after a while a woman with a pushchair asked me kindly if I was quite all right, and I said yes, thank you. I was quite all right, and I went home on the tram. That is where the story starts, not with the laughing. With an old man on a tram, holding his stick with both hands, saying a word over and over inside his head like a man who has forgotten how to pray. Lantern, lantern, lantern. My name is Wendell Trask. I live at the top of a house on Merrow Lane, 3 floors up, which the clinic considers a great joke at my expense. I was a stretcher runner in the cold water marches at 19, which is a fancy way of saying I was too small to carry a rifle usefully and too fast to waste, so they gave me a satchel and a whistle, and sent me up and down a line of frozen mud fetching men who could not fetch themselves. I am not a hero, let us get that out of the way early. I never fired a shot at a man in my life. I carried the ones who did. My brother Ephraim was 4 years older and a different article altogether. Big hands, quiet, the kind of man who mends a thing before anybody has noticed it is broken. He went into the engineers because he liked machinery, and he came out of the engineers into something else, something without a proper name that any of us were told, and he wrote home twice a month in that square, careful handwriting, and he never once said what he was doing. He said, the food is bad and the beds are worse. He said, tell mother I am eating. He said in the last one, we are the ones who go in. I did not understand that letter for 41 years. I understood it on a Tuesday at a railing in the rain. The video went up that night. I did not see it that night because I do not keep a telephone that shows me such things, and I would not want one. I heard about it the way old men hear about things, late and second-hand, and from a woman at a bus stop. But by Wednesday morning it was everywhere, and by Wednesday evening the woman who runs the shop on the corner of Merrow Lane, who is a kind woman and did not mean any harm by it, turned her little screen round on the counter and said, "Here, Mr. Trask, have you seen this? Poor man. Isn't it awful?" And she was smiling while she said it because that is what the thing did to people. It got into their faces before their opinions could catch up. 2.5 million by Wednesday, 4 by Thursday, 11 by the weekend. They had cut it well. I will say that for them. Whatever else Neve Lorimer is, she knew her business. It opened on the guardsman's face in profile, the good side, so that when the camera came round the ruined side arrived like a punch line. Then Julian's voice. Then the toaster remark. Then the pulling of the face, and then a little edited flourish, a wobble and a stutter on the frame, so that the guardsman's stillness looked funny, looked, if you can believe it, like the joke was that he could not move. They had given him a name. That was the part that did the damage. That is always the part that does the damage. The melted guard. 2 words and a man's 40 years of service goes into a bin. 2 words and he is a thing you send to your friend at 11 at night with a row of little crying laughing faces after it. 2 words and he is not a soldier of the household, not a man with a mother and a name and an oath, but a asterisk bit asterisk, a skit, a face you pull at parties. I read the comments. I made the woman in the shop scroll them for me, and she did it for about 90 seconds, and then she stopped and said, "Oh, Mr. Trask, don't," and turned the screen away, and she was right too. There were kind ones. I want that in the record. There were thousands of kind ones, and a good many of them from people who knew exactly what a burn is and how a man gets one. But the kind ones do not travel. It is a law of the world, and I am sorry to have learned it so late. Cruelty is light and kindness is heavy, and only one of them floats. By Friday, there were people coming to the Corvin forecourt, specifically to look at him. I went down. Of course I went down. I had not slept since Tuesday, and I had been to the dresser 3 times and had not opened the tin, and I could not sit in my chair for a 4th day pretending to read. He was not there. The left-hand post at the pedestrian arch had a different man on it. Young, 23, 24. A face like a fresh loaf, and he did not like the crowd one bit, and he had not yet learned the trick of putting his eyes where the world is not, so he kept almost looking at us, and you could see him hating it. I stood at the railing for 2 hours. A forecourt full of people looking for a man to laugh at when the man is not there is a strange thing to watch. They milled. They asked each other. A young couple with a camera went along the whole rank of sentries, one to the next, checking faces, disappointed like customers finding a shelf empty. I heard a man say, "They've taken him off, obviously. Bad press." I heard a woman say, "Well, you can see why. It's a bit much, isn't it, first thing in the morning? It's a bit much. I want to tell you I turned round and told that woman what she was in front of everyone, and that she went red and shut her mouth. I did not. I stood there with my hat in my hands, and I understood in a slow and sickening way exactly what had been done and exactly who had done it. Because the palace had not defended him. The palace had tidied him away. They had taken the man with the ruined face off the front gate where the cameras were and put him somewhere the cameras were not. And they will have told themselves in a meeting in a warm room with tea that they had done him a kindness, that they were protecting him, that it was for his own dignity. I know how that works. I have been protected like that before. It is the exact same protection they gave my brother, and it is the reason nobody has ever been able to write his name on a stone. They do not shoot you. They do not disgrace you. They simply move you gently out of the frame, and then they close the frame. I got the tram home and I climbed my 3 floors, and I stood in my kitchen with my coat still on, and I took the tin down off the dresser. The tin is a biscuit tin. I want to be plain about that, because I have noticed that when men tell war stories they upgrade the containers. It is a biscuit tin with a picture of a harbor on the lid, and the harbor has gone the color of weak tea, and the lid sticks. In it, my mother's wedding ring, which I could not sell in the bad year and am glad of. A card from the ministry, folded once. A ribbon in a little box, mine, from a thing I did in a ditch that I was praised for and cannot now remember clearly. 11 letters in square, careful handwriting. And a photograph. I put the photograph on the kitchen table, and I put both hands flat on either side of it, and I looked at it for a long time before I turned the lamp on. It is not a good photograph. It was taken at night with a flash by somebody who had never used a camera before and never used one again. It is a barn or a shed. You can see roof beams, and there are men sitting and standing in 2 rough rows, 19 of them, and there is a lamp on a crate in the middle giving everybody 2 shadows. They are all in shirt sleeves, every one of them. Sleeves rolled to the elbow on a cold night in a cold country, which is a strange thing for 19 men to do unless somebody has told them to. And they are holding their arms out, not saluting, not posing, just offering. Left arms forward, turned over, the inside of the wrist to the camera. And on every wrist, too small to make out unless you know what you are looking for, and have looked at it for 41 years with a magnifying glass on a Sunday afternoon, is a mark the size of a coin. My brother is second from the left in the back row. He is not smiling. None of them are smiling. There is one man near the middle, a big fellow with his head shaved, who is laughing at something, and he is the only motion in the whole picture, and I have hated and loved that man my entire life for laughing on that particular night. On the back in pencil, in Ephraim's square hand. So you will know us, E. That is all, 4 words and a letter. He sent it home 3 weeks before Ardenhall. I sat down at the kitchen table at 6:30 on a Friday evening, and I put the magnifying glass over the photograph, and I went along the 2 rows of faces one by one, the way I have done perhaps 200 times in my life, and this time I was not looking for my brother. This time I was looking for a man of about 50, with the eyes of a man who has decided to look at the middle distance. I found him 4th from the right in the front row. He was, and I had to stop here and go and stand at the window for a while, and I am not ashamed of it. He was a boy. He was about 19 or 20 years old. He had a good straight nose and a wide mouth, and his hair was the pale sort that goes white early, and he was sitting slightly forward on his crate with his left arm out and his chin up, and he was looking straight down the lens with the perfectly untroubled face of a young man who has not yet found out anything at all about the world. Both sides of his face were the same. I sat back down. My hands were not steady, and it took me 3 goes to get the lamp turned so the light fell properly. I would like to be able to say I was certain. I was not certain. I was 72, and the photograph was 41 years old and badly taken, and I had seen the man for perhaps 4 minutes across 10 feet of wet cobble with the wrong half of his face towards me. A young man with a straight nose is a young man with a straight nose. There are 10,000 of them. But I knew. There is a kind of knowing that arrives before the evidence and simply waits, patiently, with its hat in its hands, for the evidence to catch up. I had it standing at that railing on Tuesday. I had it worse now, at my own kitchen table, with a magnifying glass and a cold cup of tea and my brother looking out at me from the back row. The mark was on the boy's wrist, a lantern in a broken ring. And 41 years and 1 Tuesday later, it was still there, on the wrist of a serving guardsman of the household of Eldermore, on the arm that Julian Prue had picked up like a piece of luggage. You are entitled at this point to want to know what the mark is. So did everyone else eventually, so did a kingdom. Here is what it is, and I will tell it plain once and then we will get on. There was a war in the Coldwater Marches in my youth, and it was not a large war as wars go, and it did not last long, and the kingdom has mostly decided not to think about it. Somewhere behind the fighting line, in a valley that was chosen because it was out of the way, they built a depot, Ardenhall, sheds and revetments and a rail spur, and in the sheds they put the powder and the shells and the fuel for an army, because an army eats those things the way a fire eats wood. And at Ardenhall there was a company of engineers whose job was not building bridges. They were called the 9th Company of March's Engineers on the paper that nobody has ever been allowed to see. They were called other things by the men around them. Salvage, Ash Company, but the name that stuck, the name they used for themselves, was the Lanterns, because when a store goes up, or a magazine catches, or a shed full of the worst things men have ever invented begins to smoke at 3 in the morning, somebody has to walk into it. Everybody else runs out. That is not cowardice. That is sense. That is what you are supposed to do and what you are trained to do and what I did myself more than once, and I have never lost a night's sleep over it. The Lanterns went the other way. They went in with wet blankets and hooks and sand and their own 2 hands, into buildings that were already coming down, to drag out what could be dragged out, and to smother what could be smothered, and to shut the doors that had to be shut, so that the thing that was burning did not reach the thing that was not burning yet. There were 19 of them at Ardenhall. And in a barn, on a cold night, 3 weeks before the worst of it, one of them sat down with a needle and a pot of lampblack and marked every man in the company on the inside of the left wrist, where the strap of a watch goes, where the skin is soft and pale and lies close over the bone. They did not do it to look hard. They did not do it because it was a fashion, or because they had been drinking, or because they were young, though they were, all of them, terribly young. They did it because of what happens to a man's face in a fire. They did it so that when it was over and the men who had gone in were carried out, somebody, anybody, some clerk with a list, some boy of 19 with a satchel and a whistle, running up from the cordon, would be able to turn a wrist over and know who he was. So you will know us. That is what the mark is. That is what Julian Prue filmed for the internet on a Tuesday, and what 11 million people laughed at and called a lunchbox. And I am going to tell you now what nobody in that forecourt knew, and what only 19 men and 1 government have ever known. Officially, none of it happened. There is no 9th Company of March's Engineers. There never was. Ask the ministry. They will write back courteously within 6 weeks. We can find no record. Here is how you erase 19 men. It is easier than you think, and it does not require a villain in a black coat. It requires an embarrassment and a committee and time. The powder at Ardenhall should not have gone up. Powder does not simply decide to burn. It has to be badly made, or badly stored, or badly stacked, or all 3. And at Ardenhall it was all 3, because the contracts for the powder and the sheds and the ventilation had gone to a man called Hessick Damery, who was a lord and who had discovered, as men of his sort rediscover in every century in every country, that if you supply an army with something slightly worse than what you have been paid for, and you do it quietly, and the army is a long way away, you can buy a great many horses. The fire began in Shed 4 at about 4 in the morning. I was at the outer cordon. I was 19. I had been asleep in a truck. I am not going to describe it. I have never described it, and I am not going to start now. What I will tell you is this. It was very loud, and then it was very quiet, and the quiet was worse, and it went on for 2 hours, and for the whole of those 2 hours I stood behind a line of vehicles 400 yards back with my satchel over my shoulder and my whistle in my hand, and I watched men in shirt sleeves walk towards it. They went in through the north doors. They went in to shut the connecting doors between Shed 4 and the main magazine, because if the main magazine went, Ardenhall went, and Ardenhall was 900 yards from a village called Fano with about 400 people asleep in it. They shut the doors. That is the sentence. 19 men went in and the doors got shut, and the main magazine did not go, and the village of Feno woke up in the morning and had breakfast and has been having breakfast every morning for 41 years and does not know, has never known, will never be told. Some of them came out. Not all. I was one of the boys who ran forward when the officers finally let us, and I was one of the boys who turned wrists over in the gray light on the wet grass with a list, and I want you to understand that I did not know then that the wrist I was looking for might be my brother's. I did not know he was there. He was supposed to be 60 miles away. I found the mark on 4 men who were alive and on a number of men who were not, and I read the names off the list against the mark, and I did my job, which is the only thing I have ever been able to say for myself about that morning. I did not find Ephraim. Somebody else found Ephraim. A sergeant with a red face came and took the list out of my hands very gently and said, "Son, go and sit in the truck," and I went and sat in the truck. The inquiry took 11 months. I know that because I read about it in the newspapers, from a hospital bed and then from my mother's kitchen. And then one day the newspapers stopped writing about it, all of them in the same week, and after that there was nothing. What there was instead was a letter. Every family got one. Ours came in the spring, a good stiff envelope with a crest on it, and inside a card that said my brother had died in the course of his duties at a military installation, and that his conduct had been exemplary, and a form to sign, and a note explaining, in the most beautiful and courteous language I have ever read in my life, that the circumstances of the incident were subject to a standing order concerning matters of national security, and that the family was requested, mind in a letter with a crest on it, to a widow with one son left, to refrain from public discussion of the same. And a check. My mother did not cash the check for 9 years. She kept it in the tin, folded, going soft at the creases, and every so often she would take it out and look at it, and then put it back. And then one November the roof went and we cashed it, and she cried for 2 days, and then she never mentioned my brother's death again as long as she lived. She mentioned him, all the time. She just never mentioned the way he went. Because if you cannot say the name of the unit, and you cannot say the name of the place, and you cannot say what he was doing or why, then what you have got in the end is a young man who died somewhere of something in the course of his duties, and there is nothing to hang on that. There is no shape to it. You cannot grieve a shape you are not allowed to draw. Lord Hessex Damery died in his bed at 81 in a house with a lake in front of it. There is a hospital wing with his name on it. I have walked past it. I did not go in. I wrote my first letter to the ministry at 31, when my mother died, because I wanted to put something true on her stone and could not. We can find no record of any unit of that designation. I wrote to them at 40, at 45, at 52, when I read that the national rolls were being digitized and thought, "You fool, Trask, you absolute fool, that a machine might be less careful than a man. The matter you refer to falls outside the scope of this office. At 61, a young clerk wrote back to me by hand. I have that one in the tin too. He said he was sorry that he had gone and looked properly in the basement, and there was a gap in the numbering. 8th Company of March's Engineers, 10th Company of March's Engineers, nothing between. I do not know what to tell you, sir, he wrote, but I want you to know that I looked, and that there is a hole where something used to be. I never found out his name. The letter is signed with initials. For 11 years I did nothing, because I had run out of doors. And then a boy in an expensive coat pulled a soldier's cuff back on a wet Tuesday, and there it was, the hole, with a man standing in it. I went to the palace on the Monday. Not to the forecourt. To the visitor's office on Caudry Street, which is where you go if you are a member of the public with a matter to raise, and where they have made the chairs deliberately uncomfortable, which I respect as a policy and resent as a customer. I had shaved. I had put on the good coat. I had my ribbon in my pocket, not on my chest, because a man who pins his ribbon on to get an appointment has already lost the argument, but I had it because I am not above having it. I waited an hour and 40 minutes. Then a very polite young woman with a lanyard listened to me for 6 minutes. I will be fair to her, she listened. She wrote things down. She did not laugh and she did not look at her watch. And when I got to the part about the tattoo, her pen stopped moving and she looked up at me. And I saw for about a second and a half that she was a real person with a real grandfather somewhere. Then she said, "Mr. Trask, I want to be sure I understand. You believe a serving guardsman was a member of a military unit that the ministry says doesn't exist. And your evidence is a tattoo you saw for 2 seconds and a photograph from before I was born." "Yes." She put the pen down. "Sir," she said gently, which somehow made it worse, "since that video we have had a very great deal of correspondence about this particular guardsman. A lot of it is people wanting to help. And some of it is people who have got a story they'd like to attach him to." I sat there in her uncomfortable chair, with my hat on my knee. "I'm not selling anything," I said. I know you're not," she actually flushed. "I'll pass it up. I promise you I'll pass it up. But I have to be honest with you about what will happen to it, and what will happen to it is that it will go to the household secretary's office, and they will say that they cannot discuss the personal circumstances of any member of the guard, and that will be the end of it. That's not me being unkind. That's the rule, and it's the rule to protect him." "To protect him," I said. "Yes. By making certain that nobody is ever permitted to know who he is." She did not have an answer for that. To her credit, she did not pretend to. I stood up. My knee had gone to sleep on her chair, and it woke up with an opinion about it, and I made rather a performance of getting my stick under me. And I hope she has forgiven herself for what she said next, because it was the truest thing anybody said to me in 3 weeks, and she did not know it. "Mr. Trask, if it's really him, why hasn't he said so himself?" I found out 4 days later, at 6:10 in the evening, at the tradesman's gate on Blackthorn Passage, standing in the wet under a lamp that buzzed. I had gone at it the only way that was left to me, which was to be an old man who is prepared to stand outside in the rain for a very long time. I had asked around. I had found out from a fellow at the Veterans Club who had a nephew in the 2nd Company, which is how everything is actually found out, everywhere, in every kingdom, that the guardsmen come off the night watch through the passage gate, and that a man called Renn had been on the interior night posts since the Wednesday. Renn, that was the first time I had the name. Halvard Renn, guardsman, 2nd Company of the Household Guard, 19 years in the Guard, and before that, well, that was the question, was it not? He came out at 6:10 with his greatcoat collar up and his kit bag over his shoulder, and out of the uniform he was a smaller man than I expected, and older, and tired in the way that men are tired when the tiredness has been going on so long that it has stopped being a condition and become a fact. He saw me straight away. Of course he did. I was the only thing on Blackthorn Passage that was not a wall. "Mr. Renn," I said. He stopped. He looked at me, the whole of me, boots to hat, one pass, quick and complete, the way a soldier looks at a man he does not know in a dark street, and he said, "You want to be careful standing out here, sir. It's not lit past the corner." 12 words. That is all I got at first. 12 words, and they were about my safety. "I was there," I said, "on Tuesday on the forecourt, when that boy took hold of your arm." Something went across his face. It was not much. It was less than a flinch. It was the face of a man closing a door quietly so that nobody hears it close. "That's finished with," he said. "It isn't." "It's finished with, sir. Good night." And he started to walk. And I did the only thing I had left, which was the cruelest thing I have ever done to a stranger, and I have paid for it since, and I would do it again. I said to his back in the rain. 19 went in through the north doors at Ardenhall. He stopped. He did not turn round. He stood in the middle of Blackthorn Passage with his kit bag on his shoulder, and the rain coming down through the light of that buzzing lamp, and he stood there so long and so still that a woman coming the other way with an umbrella stepped off the pavement to go round him. "My brother was one of them," I said. "Wendell Trask, back row, second from the left in the photograph. You are fourth from the right in the front row, and you are about 19 years of age, and you have got your chin up like you think it is all going to be an adventure." He turned round, and I saw, in that bad light, the face of a man who had just been told the one thing he had spent 41 years arranging his entire existence around never being told. "Sir," he said. His voice had gone somewhere down into his chest. "You are mistaken." "I am not." "You are mistaken," he said again, and he said it the way you say a line you have practiced. "There is no such unit. There is no such photograph. I was never at any place of that name, and if you go about saying otherwise, you will be doing me a great deal of harm, and I would ask you, sir, to stop." "Renn. Guardsman Renn," he said, "and you will forgive me, I have got to be somewhere." And he walked away up Blackthorn Passage in the rain with his back absolutely straight, and I stood there under the buzzing lamp with my mouth open, and I understood at last, 41 years too late, the whole architecture of the thing. He was not hiding. He was obeying. Somewhere in a drawer in a ministry basement, there is a piece of paper with his signature on it, and it says that in consideration of his discharge and his pension and his passage home, he undertakes never to speak of a certain matter to any person at any time for the rest of his natural life. They laughed at his face on the internet and called him a melted man, and 11 million people watched it, and he could not tell them, not because he was proud, not because he was stoic, not because it was beneath him, because he had given his word to the crown, and the crown had never given it back. I did not sleep that night either. I am aware that I keep saying so. It was a poor month for sleeping. What I did instead was sit at my kitchen table with a sheet of writing paper and try 11 times to compose a letter to a woman I had never met, and fail 11 times. And on the 12th, I stopped trying to be impressive and simply wrote what was true. Princess Adela of the Royal House of Harrogate is the King's sister. She is a plain-spoken woman of about 60 who has spent her life on committees that nobody wants to sit on, the Veterans' Hospices, the Pensions Review, the Rolls of Honor. Every autumn she reads the rolls aloud at the hollow wall, the whole roll, all of it, standing up, in whatever weather the realm has arranged, and it takes her the better part of 3 hours, and she has never once allowed anybody to read a portion of it for her. I had never spoken to her in my life, but I had watched her read those names on 11 consecutive autumns from a folding chair in the 3rd row of the public enclosure, and I had noticed a thing I do not think many people noticed. She reads them at exactly the same pace all the way through. Not faster at the end. Not tired at the end. Every man gets the same 3 seconds as the first man. A person who does that is a person who thinks a name is a real thing. So I wrote to her, 2 pages. I told her about the Tuesday and the boy in the coat and the wrist. I told her about my brother and the barn and the 19. I told her that a serving guardsman of her brother's household was, at that moment, being laughed at by 11 million people for a wound he received shutting a door that saved a village, and that he was forbidden to say so, and that the person forbidding him was her family. I put it in the post on the Wednesday, and then, because I am an old man and old men have no time to be patient, I did something a great deal less dignified on the Saturday. She was opening a rehabilitation wing at the Veterans Hospital on Faro Hill. It was in the newspaper. There would be a cordon and a ribbon and about 200 people. I got there 2 hours early to get my place at the rope, and I stood in that place for 2 hours with my knee filing formal complaints, and I had the letter, a second copy, in my coat, because I did not trust the post and I was right not to. She came along the rope line after the ribbon. She does that. She is known for it. She is not a woman who waves from a distance. She came along shaking hands slowly in a coat the color of a wet slate, and she was not hurrying and she was not performing, and she stopped for a woman in a wheelchair for a good 4 minutes while the men with the earpieces stood about looking at their watches. She got to about 6 feet from me. And I did a thing that a man of 72 with a stick has absolutely no business doing, which is that I put my hand on the rope and I ducked underneath it. I got perhaps 3 steps. It is very quick. I want to say that because people imagine it is dramatic and it is not. It is quick and it is efficient and it is not rough. A man had my right arm above the elbow and another had come round in front of me, and there was a third somewhere behind, and I was stopped, entirely in the middle of a step, and my stick was on the ground, and somebody was saying, "Sir, sir, sir," in a very calm voice about 4 inches from my ear. And I said, I shouted it, "I am afraid." I shouted it right over the top of them, in a voice I did not know I still owned, the voice I used to use on a cordon in the marches at 4 in the morning. "Ma'am, the 9th Company of MARCHES Engineers." Everything stopped. I will never, as long as I live, forget the next 4 seconds. 200 people at a hospital gate on a Saturday morning. A princess of the realm 6 feet away with her hand still half out towards somebody else. 3 security officers holding a shaking old man off the ground by his arms, and my walking stick lying on the wet tarmac between us all. And her face. Her face did something. It went from the polite public arrangement that people of her sort wear like a coat, to something quite different and quite private, and it happened in about half a second, and it was not sympathy. It was asterisk recognition. Not of me, she had never seen me before, of the words. "Let him go," she said. "Ma'am, let him go. He's 70 years old and he's dropped his stick." They let me go. Somebody picked up the stick and put it back in my hand, and I stood there in front of her with my hat gone and my hair and my eyes and my whole body, shaking so badly that I could hear my own coat buttons. She looked at me for a long moment. "Say it again," she said. "The 9th Company of Marches Engineers," I said. "Ma'am, Ardenhall, 19 men." They shut the north doors. "And who are you?" "Wendell Trask. I was a stretcher runner on the outer cordon. My brother was in the barn when they marked them." My voice went. It simply went. It had been holding on out of pride and it gave up all at once. "Ma'am, one of them is standing on your brother's gate with his face burned off and the whole kingdom is laughing at him, and he is not allowed to tell them why." She did not say anything. She reached out and she took the letter out of my hand. I had not offered it. She took it, and she folded it once and put it inside her coat, and she looked at the men with the earpieces and she said, quite mildly, "Nobody touches this gentleman." Get him a chair and a cup of tea, and take his address." And then she leaned in, close enough that only I could hear it, and she said, "Mr. Trask, I have been asking about that gap in the numbering since I was 24 years old. Now I have to tell you about the 3 weeks that followed, and I would rather not, and I am going to anyway, because a story where the good part comes straight after the brave part is a story told by somebody who has never actually tried it. Nothing happened. That is not entirely true. Things happened. They were simply all the wrong things. The letter I received from her private office was, I am sure, the best letter that office knew how to write. It came within 9 days, which for a palace is the speed of light. It said that Her Royal Highness had read my letter personally and was most grateful to me for bringing the matter to her attention. It said that inquiries had been made of the ministry and of the office of the rolls. And then it said what they always say, and I had known it was coming from the moment I saw the envelope, and I sat down on my stairs to read the rest of it anyway. The office of the rolls is unable to identify any unit corresponding to the designation you provide. The ministry advises that no formation of that name appears in the establishment tables for the period in question. Of course it does not. That is the whole point. That is the entire, elegant, unbreakable point of the thing they did. You cannot use the record to prove that the record has been altered. The gap is not evidence. The gap is an absence, and an absence on paper looks exactly like a thing that was never there. 41 years and I still fell for it. I still opened that envelope with my heart going. And the second thing that happened was Julian Prue made another video. He was famous now, you see. That is what we had done, all of us, by watching. We had made a 26-year-old shipping heir into a man with an audience, and an audience is a stomach. You have to keep putting things into it. The second video was called Asterisk. We found him Asterisk. Somebody had sold them the night watch. Blackthorn Passage, 6:10, the buzzing lamp. I do not know who did it, and I have thought about that person often, and I hope they have not had a comfortable year. They filmed him in his greatcoat with his kit bag over his shoulder at the end of a 9-hour night, out of uniform, off duty, a private man in a dark street going home. They walked backwards in front of him the whole way to the tram stop. "Where you going, mate? Big night at the palace." "Have they hidden you? Have they hidden you round the back?" "Is it hot in there? Is it?" And then Casper Dinn, delighted with himself, delivering the line he had clearly been saving all day. "Is it too hot for you? Is it too hot?" Halvard Renn walked to the tram stop and stood at the tram stop and got on the tram, and did not once look at them, and did not once speak, and the last shot of the video is his face through the carriage window, lit from underneath, looking at the middle distance. 9 million views in 4 days. The household issued a statement. It is 41 words long. It says the household does not comment on the personal circumstances of individual members of the Guard, and that all members of the Guard are expected to maintain the standards of conduct appropriate to their position. They put that out, about the man being followed down a dark street, a sentence reminding the asterisk victim of his obligations. I read it standing up in the shop on Marrow Lane, and then I went outside and sat on the low wall by the bins for 20 minutes in the cold with my hands on my knees. The last thing, the worst thing, came from the nephew at the Veterans Club, third hand, on a Thursday, over a game of dominoes that nobody was playing. Renn was being retired. Not dismissed. Nobody was going to be so crude as to dismiss him. He was being offered, the way my mother was asterisk requested, an early retirement on full pension at the end of the month, in recognition of his long and distinguished service, and it had been made clear to him with great warmth that this was for his own good, and for the good of the household. 19 years in the Guard, 41 years of silence. And they were going to end it by walking him quietly out of a side door, so that the forecourt could go back to being pretty. He's got one more public watch, the nephew said. He was young. He was upset in the way young men get upset, all in the jaw. He asked for it. He put in for it specially. Old Pell tried to talk him out of it, said it'd be a circus, said the crowd would be there just to gawp at him. And Renn said. He stopped and looked at his dominoes. Renn said, "Then they can gawp at a man standing his post properly, sir. It's the last thing I've got to show them." "What watch?" I said. My voice came out strange. "Remembrance, Saturday week, the hollow wall." He looked up. "He's in the King's cordon. Front rank." I sat there in the Veterans Club, with the dominoes going soft in my hand. And I thought, they will all be there. The king will be there. The princess will be there, standing up for 3 hours reading names that do not include my brothers. 10,000 people in the enclosures and 500,000 watching it at home, every camera in the kingdom. And Julian Prue, who now has an audience to feed, and who has just discovered that this particular man is the most profitable thing that has ever happened to him. He will be there too. I went home and I climbed my 3 floors and I took the tin down off the dresser, and this time I did not put it back. The hollow wall is a curved thing of gray stone, 400 yards of it, in a sunken garden below the level of the road, so that when you walk down into it, the traffic goes quiet all at once, and you are alone with about 90,000 names. They are cut small. That is the first thing that gets you. They are cut small because there are so many of them, and because whoever designed that wall understood that a name should not be a monument. A name should be a name, the size a name is, the size it would be on a letter, so that you have to go close and stand where the man's shoulder would have been in order to read it. On Remembrance morning, they put the enclosures on the grass and the wreaths at the foot of the wall, and the king comes down the long ramp on foot with his head bare, and the household guard forms the cordon along the last 100 yards, 1 man every 6 feet, facing outward at the crowd. It rained in the night and stopped at dawn. Wet stone, wet wool, the cold coming up out of the ground. I got there at 7:30 for a 10 o'clock and took a place at the rope on the western side, 6 rows back, because that is where the cordon comes closest to the public, and I had done my arithmetic. In my inside pocket, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, I had cut off an old kit roll at 2 in the morning like the mad old soldier I am, was a photograph of 19 men in a barn. I stood for 2.5 hours. My knee does not prefer Saturdays and let me know it. At 9:20, the guardsmen came down the steps in file, and the bearskins moved through the gray morning like something in a dream, and they took their places and turned outward to face us. Halvard Renn came to the rope 4 rows down from me, and 1 man along. You could feel it go through the enclosure, a pressure change, the way a room changes when somebody famous walks into it, except it was not fame. It was the other thing. It was what they had made out of him. Phones came up, not a few, hundreds. I stood at that rope with my hat in my hands and watched several hundred citizens of this kingdom, at a national memorial, on a morning set aside for the remembrance of the dead, raise their telephones to photograph a man's face, because a boy in a coat had taught them it was funny. Most of them were not laughing. I want to be fair about that. But they filmed him all the same, and I have decided it is worse. To laugh at a man is at least to have an opinion about him. To film him without laughing is to have decided he is scenery. Renn stood his post, boots together, rifle at his side, chin level, eyes at the middle distance, and the wet light of a gray November morning falling equally on both halves of his face. And at 10:05, Julian Prue came down the ramp. He had brought 11 people with him, Casper Dinn, Neve Lorimer with her phone, and a knot of others who had simply attached themselves the way that sort of person does. And they came down that ramp on a remembrance morning talking at a normal volume. They worked their way along the rope until they were at the front, directly opposite Renn. I was 6 feet from them. I could hear him breathing. "Third time lucky," said Julian Prue. The processional bell went at 10 exactly. The crowd came to its feet all the way down the garden, 10,000 of them, and the noise of it dropped away to nothing but the bell. And up at the head of the ramp the king came into the light with his head bare. King Alaric is not a tall man, and he does not pretend to be. He came down that ramp on foot, alone, at the pace of a man who is not being hurried by anything on this earth. And behind him, at 10 paces, came his sister in a coat the color of a wet slate, and behind her the wreath-bearers, and the whole garden stood in absolute silence and watched them come. The king reached the foot of the wall. He laid the first wreath. He stepped back and stood with his head bowed, and the buglers up on the parapet began the call that ends the year, and 10,000 people stopped breathing. And that was the moment Julian Prue chose. I have never worked out whether he planned it. I think it is possible he planned nothing at all, that he simply had a hunger in him and a camera in his hand and no floor underneath either of them. And the silence was there, and it was enormous, and he could not stand to be nobody inside it. He ducked under the rope. 2 steps, camera up, straight at Renn. "Show them the arm," he said loudly over the bugle. "Go on, show them the—" And he reached out and took hold of Halvard Renn's left wrist. I was not aware of deciding anything. I have gone over it, and I cannot find the decision anywhere. There is the sight of that manicured hand closing on that white cuff, and then there is me, under the rope in the open, in the middle of the king's cordon at a national memorial, with my hat on the ground and my stick in my left hand and a photograph in my right. And I heard a voice come out of me, and it was not the voice of a 72-year-old man on Marrow Lane. It was a boy's voice on a cordon in the Coldwater Marches in the last hour of a bad night, and it went down 400 yards of gray stone and came back off the wall, and 10,000 people heard every word of it. "Take your hand off that man." Prue let go. He let go before he had thought about it. The body obeys that voice before the mind gets a vote. That is the whole reason the voice exists, and he turned round with his mouth open and his camera still running. And I did not stop. I could not have stopped. There was 41 years of it, and it had found the door at last. That mark on his wrist. I was pointing. I had my stick up and I was pointing at his arm, and my hand was shaking so badly I could hardly hold it, is the mark of the 9th Company of MARCHES Engineers. The lanterns. The bugle had stopped. I do not know when it stopped. 19 men. ARDNHALL. The 4th of November, 41 years ago this week. I turned round in the middle of that cordon, and I faced 10,000 people, and I held up a photograph the size of a postcard, as if anybody past the 3rd row could possibly see it, and I heard my own voice break in half, and I kept going anyway. They marked their wrists so that we could tell who they were afterwards. Do you understand me? They put it there. And I struck my own left wrist with 2 fingers, hard enough to hurt, because they knew that when they came out we would not be able to know them by their faces. Nobody moved. Not the guardsmen, not the officers, not the men with the earpieces who had started forward and then, for reasons I will wonder about until I die, stopped. "They shut the north doors," I said. The powder store at Ardenhall was going up, and there was a village 900 yards behind it with 400 souls asleep in it, and 19 men in shirt sleeves walked in through the fire to shut the doors, and they shut them. I was crying. I did not know it at the time. Somebody told me afterwards. My brother was one of them, Wendell Trask. He is not on this wall. He is not on any wall. There is a hole in the numbering where his company used to be, and I have been writing letters about it since I was 31 years of age. And this morning. And I turned, and I pointed at Halvard Renn, standing at his post 6 feet from me with his eyes fixed on the middle distance and the rain on his bearskin. This morning you are all filming the last one on his feet, and calling him a *melted man*, and he cannot tell you what he did. Because your government made him promise not to. And then I ran out, simply ran out the way an engine does. I stood there in the middle of the cordon in front of 10,000 people with a photograph in my hand and nothing left in my chest, and my knee gave up and I sat down, not fell. Sat heavily on the wet grass of the hollow wall garden, like a man who has finished. And in the enormous silence, somewhere over on my left, near the back of the western enclosure, an old man stood up. I did not see him at first. I heard the chair. Then further along, another. Then two more. Then a woman in the third row of the eastern enclosure in a headscarf with a row of ribbons on her coat that would have taken her 3 minutes to explain. They were standing up all over that garden. Old men getting out of folding chairs with the help of sticks and the help of their sons. Old men taking their hats off. Old men coming to attention, badly, slowly, heels not quite together anymore, shoulders not quite back, chins up all the same, 10,000 people in that garden, and perhaps 400 of them who had ever worn anything, and every single one of the 400 was on his feet. They did not know what the Ninth Company was. Almost none of them had ever heard the name. It did not matter. They knew what a man's wrist was for. And then, from somewhere up near the wall, quite clearly, in the silence, the voice of a woman who has spent 11 consecutive autumns reading 90,000 names at the same pace all the way through. Wendell Trask. I looked up. Princess Adela had come down off the step. She was standing in the middle of the wreaths at the foot of the hollow wall with her hands empty at her sides, and she was looking straight at me, and she said it again, louder, so that it went the whole 400 yards. Wendell Trask. And the king of Eldermore turned round. He came down the wall towards us on foot, past his own wreath, past his own guardsmen, and the whole apparatus of the state came unstuck behind him. The equerries, the officers, the men with the earpieces, all of them starting forward and then having to stop, because the king had not stopped, and there is only one man in that garden who gets to decide where he goes. He stopped in front of Halvard Renn. Renn stood his post. Boots together, rifle at his side, eyes at the middle distance, exactly as he had stood on a Tuesday while a boy pulled his cuff back. He did not look at his king. He is not permitted to look at his king. That is the whole of the thing. That is the entire, ruinous, magnificent architecture of the man. King Alaric looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked down at me, sitting on the wet grass with a photograph in my hand. "You are Trask," he said. "Yes, sir." "Get him up," the king said, to nobody in particular, and about 4 people got me up, and somebody put my hat back on my head, which I have always thought was a very kind thing to have thought of at such a moment. He held out his hand. I gave him the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Longer than a man looks at a photograph to be polite. He turned it over and read the 4 words on the back, and he turned it back, and he looked at the 2 rows of young men in shirt sleeves in a barn, holding out their arms. And King Alaric said, in front of 10,000 of his subjects and half the cameras in the realm, "I have never heard of the 9th Company of March's Engineers." And I heard myself say, quite steadily, in the enormous quiet, "No, sir, that was the point." I have been asked since whether I was frightened, whether I thought I had gone too far saying that to him there. I was not, and I did not, because I watched what his face did when I said it, and it did not do what a powerful man's face does when he is contradicted in public. It went absolutely white, and then absolutely still, and I have seen that sequence exactly once before in my life, on a red-faced sergeant taking a list gently out of a boy's hands. It is the face of a man discovering what he has been standing on. "Adela," he said without turning round. "Sir, you have been asking about this." "Since I was 24, said Princess Adela. "And there is no 9th Company," she said. "There is a file. It is not held by the ministry, and it is not held by the rolls, and that is why nobody could ever find it, because everybody has spent 41 years looking in the wrong building. It is held by the household. It is called the Ardenhall Contingency, and it is sealed under a standing order of the Crown, and I have been refused access to it 4 times in 11 years, by 4 different men, all of whom were extremely sorry. On whose authority is it sealed? Adela did not blink. Yours, sir, inherited, your father's and his before him. The King of Eldermore stood in the wreaths at the foot of the hollow wall on Remembrance morning, with a photograph of 19 dead men in his hand. Then I unseal it, he said, today, now, before I leave this garden, and I will read every page of it myself, and whatever is in it will be published entire, and if it shames this house, then this house will be ashamed, publicly, in daylight, where it can be seen. He turned to Renn, and he did a thing I did not expect and have never entirely got over. He took 1 step back from that guardsman, and he straightened, and he said clearly in the voice of the Crown, Guardsman Renn, whatever undertaking of silence you gave to this Crown regarding Ardenhall, whatever paper you signed, whatever word you were made to give in exchange for your discharge or your pension or your passage home, it is discharged. It is void. It should never have been asked of you, and it is not asked of you now. You are released, entirely and forever. A pause. Speak or do not speak as you choose. It is yours. It has always been yours. We simply took it, and I am giving it back. Halvard Renn stood at his post for perhaps 5 seconds. Then he did the only thing that morning that made me put my hand over my eyes. He came to attention, properly, the full movement, the crash of the boots that they teach you and then spend 20 years telling you to make quieter, and he brought his rifle up, and he stood, and he turned his head for the first time in the whole business, and he looked at his king. And he said, Sir, there were 19 of us. 6 came out. I am the last of the 6 on his feet, and I have been the last of them for 6 years. His voice was not what I expected. It was quiet and rather flat, and it had a bit of the North Country still in it, 41 years on. May I say the names, sir? The king said, You may say the names. And Halvard Renn, standing in the king's cordon at the hollow wall with his ruined face, turned to 10,000 people, and every camera in the kingdom on him, said 19 names. He said them the way Princess Adela reads the rolls, same pace, same weight, first to last. He did not hurry at the end, and he did not falter, and he did not have a list, because a man does not need a list for 19. He said Wendell Trask *11th. And I stood in the wet grass in the middle of the cordon of the household guard of Eldermore, and I heard my brother's name said aloud, in public, on a wall, in a country that had spent my whole adult life pretending he had never existed. 41 years, 4 seconds, that is the exchange rate. Nobody tells you. I will finish the ugly part quickly, because it does not deserve much. Julian Prue was arrested where he stood, and I mean where he stood. He did not get back under the rope. He was charged with assaulting a member of the household guard in the execution of his duty, and with a public order offense at a place of national remembrance, and the evidence against him was overwhelming and entirely of his own manufacture, because he had filmed all of it twice, from 2 angles, and put it on the internet himself with music. Neve Lorimer walked into a police station 8 days later and handed over every raw file she had, unedited, including the ones they had cut. She did not have to do that. She was not under suspicion. She has said publicly since that she was 23 and frightened of being the one who was not laughing, and that this is an explanation and not an excuse, and she is right on both counts. Prue got 18 months, suspended, and 400 hours, and a fine his father paid before lunch. That is not justice, and I will not pretend it is. The realm did the rest itself. His name is a thing people say now when they mean a particular sort of person, and he will carry that the whole of his life, which is longer than 18 months and cannot be paid before lunch. He wrote to Renn. Renn did not answer. He wrote to me as well, and I did answer, and I said, learn the 19 names. Not for him, not for me. Learn them because you filmed a man's wrist and did not know what you were looking at. And there is only one cure for that, and it is not an apology. I do not know if he did it. I hope so. I have stopped needing to know. The Ardenhall contingency ran to 940 pages, and the king read it, and it was published entire on the 14th of December, and it was every bit as bad as 41 years of silence had suggested. Bad powder, bad sheds, bad ventilation, a lord with a lake in front of his house, an inquiry that got to within one witness of the contract and then found all at once that it had reached the boundary of national security. 19 citations drafted, typed, signed, and then withdrawn, because a citation has to say what a man did, and what these men did was walk into the consequences of a nobleman's arithmetic, and you cannot put that in the rolls without putting the nobleman in there too. So they took the company out of the numbering, 8th, 10th, and they went to 19 families with a stiff envelope and a courteous request and a check. The wing of the hospital with Hesek Damery's name on it is not called that anymore. They changed it in the spring. It is called the Ardenhall wing now, and it is a Burns unit, and there is a small gray lantern in a broken ring cut into the stone above the door, and I was there when they unveiled it, and I did go in this time. They restored the 9th Company to the rolls of honor on a bright cold morning in March. They did it properly. That is the thing I want on the record more than anything else in this whole account. They did it properly. There was no committee, no phased approach, no consultation. There was a king who had read 940 pages and had not slept much either. 19 names went onto the hollow wall, not on a plaque, not on an annex, not on a nice new piece of stone somewhere off to the side where it would not disturb the design, but cut into the wall itself, in the run of the 90,000, in the same small letters, at the same height, where you have to go and stand where the man's shoulder would have been in order to read him. They found Osric fell in a hospice 200 miles north, 84 years old, the 6th of the 6th, and they brought him down in a car with a nurse, and he sat in a wheeled chair at the foot of the wall in a blanket, and when the citation for the 9th Company was read aloud, he turned his left wrist over in his lap and looked at it for a long time, and then he laughed. Just once. A great bark of a laugh in the middle of the silence, and I looked at him, and I knew him, and I could not believe it. The big fellow with the shaved head, 2nd row, middle, the only man laughing in a barn on a cold night 41 years ago. He died in June. He got 3 months. That is not nothing. Do not let anybody tell you 3 months is nothing. Halvard Renn received the Cross of Valor from the hands of King Alaric on the steps of the hollow wall, 41 years and 4 months after it was drafted, typed, signed, and put in a drawer. The citation is 11 lines long. It describes the shutting of the north doors. It names the village of Fenno, and it gives the number 411, which is how many people were asleep in it. He was not retired. He asked in writing to go back on the wall the same post, the left-hand one by the pedestrian arch, where the public can get near enough to breathe on you, and the household, which had spent 3 months learning things about itself the hard way, said yes. He is there now. He will be there on Tuesday, and I will be there because Tuesday is when I walk. They still come to look at him. That has not changed, and I did not expect it to. But they come differently. They come and they stand at the railing and they look at a man in a red tunic with half a face made of something poured, and they do not raise their telephones, most of them, and the ones who do raise them lower them again fairly quickly, and a good number of them do a thing I still cannot get used to. They touch the inside of their own left wrist. Just a touch. 2 fingers on the place where the strap of a watch goes, and then they go on. People leave paper lanterns at the foot of the Corvin railings. Little ones, the sort you can fold out of a sheet of paper. Nobody organized it and nobody encouraged it, and the household would very much like them to stop, because they get wet and they blow about the forecourt and a guardsman cannot pick them up. I hope they never stop. Last Tuesday I was at the railing, and there was a young guardsman on the post beside Renn's, the one with the face like a fresh loaf, grown up a bit now, learning to put his eyes where the world is not. And there was a family at the rope and the father was explaining. He got most of it wrong. He said 30 men and he said it was a fuel dump and he called the village by the wrong name. But he got the important part right, because everybody gets the important part right now, and it is the only part that ever mattered. He said, look at his wrist. That's how they knew who they were. Halvard Renn stood his post with his eyes on the middle distance and did not move and did not speak, and did not so much as change the rhythm of his breathing, because he is on duty and he is not permitted to react to the public, and I have stopped being angry about that. That silence is not the one they made him keep. That one is his. He chose it and he keeps it, and it is the last piece of the whole business that is entirely his own. But at 10:30, when the watch changed and the file came off the wall and went past the railing at the slow march, he did break protocol. He does it every Tuesday. He is going to get himself in trouble one of these days, and he does not care. As he came level with an old man standing at the railing with his hat in his hands, Guardsman Halvard Renn of the 2nd Company of the Household Guard turned his head, 4 inches, no more, nobody notices but me, and he looked at me. That is all. He does not smile. He does not nod. He looks at me for the length of 1 pace, and then he faces front and goes on, and his boots take him away up the forecourt in the perfect time of a man who has been doing this for 19 years and would do it for 19 more. 1 pace, 2 seconds near enough. The same 2 seconds it took, on a wet Tuesday in November, for a boy in an expensive coat to pull a cuff back and show a kingdom a lantern in a broken ring. So you will know us, my brother wrote. We know you now, Ephraim. The whole realm knows you now, and it took 41 years and an old man's bad knee and the cruelty of a stranger to do it, and I would not undo 1 hour of it, because you are cut into that wall in letters the size of your name, at the height of your shoulder, in the run of the 90,000. And on Tuesdays, when it is fine, I go down and I put 2 fingers on my own left wrist, and I stand there a while with the men who came out and the men who did not, and nobody laughs. Nobody laughs anymore,